You know, usually, Chris, the introduction is Rockstar Astronaut. Now we have the official album release, so that title is there. You are bringing this, and you know, listening to some of the sample tracks already with the album coming out in October. This is the real deal. You are playing, or you did play and record music in outer space. How do you even begin to approach pulling that off?
And I wrote a lot of the music up there as well. Some of the songs, I think, like any musician, you know, you've got partially written songs in your head all the time. And so some of them I finished up there, and some of them I just wrote from scratch. You know, someday on the space station I was thinking about these words and floating back into my little sleep pod, scribbling down a few words, floating back to work again. But over the 5 months that I was off the Earth, I ended up writing and recording 15 or 16 songs. But I didn't even know what I was going to do with them, really. I thought, I'm an astronaut, but I'm also a musician. I'm up here, I should try and see what I come up with. And in the past, I don't know, 8 months or so, we listened to those tracks. We chose 11 of them, I think, put full instrumentals underneath with some studio musicians in Toronto. And then we put Space Oddity on as well, just because people know it, and that became the album. It's Space Sessions, Songs from a Tin Can. It was my daughter's idea to name it Songs from a Tin Can, and I could not be happier how it sounds. The musicians really filled out the music, so it becomes what I always hear in my head. But the voice and the guitar are the moment in time. Well,
it's an ambitious task to say you're going to be on the International Space Station, then create a recording studio. Physically, where do you record? How do you pull this off? You know, there's an app for everything. What did you use to record?
There was nobody to ask. You know, how do you record? I had to invent the whole thing. I tried a bunch of locations. I worked with a producer on Earth, a guy named Paul Mills. I'd send him a little quick video. How's this one? He's going, nah, it's too noisy, too noisy. But inside the little tiny padded pod that you sleep in, where your sleeping bag is floating weightless in there, I found it was just a little wider than my shoulders and just a little taller than I was. I could bring the guitar in there, and it's actually a Vancouver-made guitar, a Larrivee. But it's a parlor guitar, slightly small. So I could just get the guitar in there with me, not horizontal, but just with me. And I could I tried different ways of recording, but just an iPad, GarageBand, hooked up to a little weightless floating microphone. I'd record the guitar tracks to a click track and then put my voice over top. And I mean, it's busy on a spaceship, but evenings, nights when some nights when I wasn't too tired, I'd go, okay, I got to get a song recorded tonight, and I managed to get 15 or 16 done by the time we landed.
Simply incredible, and you know, you look at the art of music as such a creative form of storytelling and connecting emotion. Yeah. When you're up there for 5 months, why is it so vital to have that form of music when you're on a project like you were?
Well, I grew up with folk music and some of the great Canadian folk music, East Coast stuff, and Gordon Lightfoot, who tells some of the great Canadian stories, you know, Canadian Railroad Trilogy and Edmund Fitzgerald and Steel Rail Blues and some really thoughtful stuff, and Ian and Sylvia Tyson and Great Big Sea and Stan Rogers. They help explain Canada to Canadians. You know, they help us see ourselves with a clarity. It's like looking at a beautiful photograph of a wedding, and you might have missed that moment. And when you see that picture, it helps almost make the thing more real because you have time to think about it. And music can do that for us, I think. And so on board a spaceship, I talked to schools all the time. I made little videos. Every spare moment I had, I tried to share the experience. But music kind of speaks to us a whole different way. And as a part-time musician, I thought I'm going to do my best to try and capture this experience through the lyrics and the melodies that come to me up there. And my profits from the album go to music education in Canada. It's not a get-rich project or something. To me, it's just another best effort on my part, another way to try and share the experience of leaving Earth, because I'm one of the few that's had a chance to do that so far. As completely and as frankly as I can with as many people as possible.
Well, you know, I always hear and experience the fact that writing is so cathartic. This is what you've done, capturing the experience. What was the very first song you ever played on a guitar?
When my brother and I bought a guitar when I was about 10 years old, we had John Denver, one of his live albums, I forget. It was something he performed somewhere, and a couple of his songs are really simple. So I started, I think, with John Denver, and the simple stuff, and then just slowly worked up. And I've always had the thought that when you're trying to be a musician, you should learn a song. Don't just learn the technical skill, but learn a song, and then learn another song, and then learn another song, and try and build up your understanding of music that way. And every person you meet that's a musician, they can teach you another song or another way to interpret that song. And so starting with some of the simplest of sort of country folk kind of music, everything I've learned and played since then has just one more piece of a very rich puzzle that music is. And
I love with that puzzle, you've included your family along the way. You mentioned your brother with Dave in Canada. I think the last check it was over 2 million hits on YouTube.
Yeah.
Obviously Space Oddity now up to 26 million.
That I did with my son Evan.
And you know, you include your son in on it too, and you're an inspiration for so many on so many platforms. When you kind of look at how you progress now that, you know, the space adventure is kind of come to a close in outer space, who inspires you? Where is the consistent source of inspiration for you to keep putting out these amazing, amazing projects?
It's kind of strange if you're an astronaut, when you sit down next to somebody, you know, at a restaurant or on an airplane or something, and you're talking, and they say, "Oh, so what do you do for a living?" And I say, "I'm an astronaut." And then all normal conversation ceases, right? It's like I'm going to answer naturally because it's such a rare job. And so I learned a long time ago to try and sort of get the other person talking about themselves. Mostly as a defense mechanism, but the beauty of that, what I found out, is when you get a person to honestly start talking about the experiences that they've had, you discover almost immediately how brave people are, and that everybody's done something you haven't. And people are fighting battles that you're completely unaware of. And there is heroism in every single person you talk to. They just don't normally tell you about it. And so when you talk about who's your role model, initially for me it was, you know, science fiction figures and Captain Kirk, and then it became, you know, Neil Armstrong and Yuri Gagarin, John Glenn. But the older I get, the more I recognize just how impressive people are and how subtle they are about it. And if you can just get someone to start telling you about the amazing things they've done, you can learn a lot from everybody.
I think that's such a great part of the approach for the connection, even watching you on stage, how you share sentiments with people when it comes to science and when it comes to leadership. And one of the mantras I know you threw out is aim to be a zero.
Yeah.
What does that mean, and what's the big idea there?
You know, I started my professional career as a Canadian Air Force fighter pilot. I flew CF-18s. You need to be confident to fly a CF-18. One seat, you're in charge, and intercepting armed Soviet bombers off the coast of Canada, you need a lot of confidence. So you start to think that because you're confident, therefore you're right, or that you can afford to be arrogant. And you can come into a situation, size it up immediately, and start making decisions. And a couple of years later in life, I realized that that you miss the subtleties. And when you come into a situation like that, feeling like you're a big positive, a big, you know, a plus one, you know, you're a positive force on everything, everybody around you, when you come into that situation, recognizes that you're not a plus one, you're a minus one. You're blundering around doing stupid stuff, and people would just wish you'd go away. And so I started thinking, I want to try and come into a new situation and aim to be neutral, like not a plus one, not a minus one. My initial objective coming into a new situation is just sort of a zero. I want to come in and be helpful, but not in charge. I want to absorb enough about it to actually catch some of the nuance and the subtlety of what's happening around me, and then be a lot more deliberate in trying to maybe be a plus one much more accurately. And I've found, maybe starting at about 40 years old, that is so much more effective, so much more appreciated, and a far better way to come into a new situation. And so now when I come into one, I deliberately set up in my mind, let's look for good opportunities to keep my mouth shut. Let's see what's actually happening here. If the house is on fire, you got to do stuff right away. But the house is hardly ever on fire, and we often tend to treat it that way, or we tend to have a pretty inaccurate, inflated view of ourselves. So I think aiming to be a zero initially is something a lot of people could do better.
I can say good luck doing that now, because as soon as Commander Hadfield walks into a room, boom, that's like plus 10 on the charts right there. And you can see the impact and the fascination with space exploration. I mean, I've heard you comment on The Space Odyssey being a great movie. Gravity came out a couple years ago, and now The Martian with Matt Damon. I know you were recently at TIFF, saw the photo on Twitter. This idea of learning about life on another planet,
Yeah.
one, do you think this fascination will ever die? And two, 3 years from now, where do you see this becoming a reality?
Part of the curiosity is to know if we're alone in the universe or not. And people always imagine they see aliens, and every time you see something in the sky you don't understand, we call it an unidentified flying object, but we immediately think it's unidentified. It must be, intelligent life from another solar system or something. It's a real fundamental fascination with people, which is natural. And that's part of the spur of exploration, to try and see things we don't understand, and then to try and maybe get a better picture of ourselves by exploring them. And that's at the core of space exploration. It's what drove us, back in the early 60s to go to the moon. It's why we have rovers on Mars. It's why we just blasted past Pluto. But we've sort of looked everywhere now. We've gone and run some little probes, and now it's kind of a question of where do we go? Now that we've got sort of a good inventory of the options, what makes sense? What's affordable for us? What's worth balancing with everything else that society does? And I think from the space station, where we've been living for 15 years, we'll slowly work our way, maybe over the next 15, to the moon, just like we did in Antarctica for the last 100 years, where we go there briefly, then we go there longer, until eventually we have a permanent human habitation on the moon, to study the history of that, to look back at the Earth, to look out at the universe. And then eventually we'll have invented enough things to go further and maybe, emulate what Matt Damon's pretending to do in the movie The Martian, and that is take that natural human necessity to explore and the best of our technology, and then let it take us to as far as we can, so that we can then really get a perspective of who we are and learn from it. And so I'm really looking forward to each one of those small steps. And really proud of the part that I've had so far in enabling them. If
you could add movie critic to your list of titles, what would you give? How many Hadfields out of 5? 5 being outstanding for The Martian.
Martian does a great job. Matt Damon is superb in the movie. I read the book. I know Andy Weir, the guy who wrote it. I know the story goes, and I was still all keyed up at the end. How's this going to turn out? It's I see all the little technical errors because I'm the worst guy in the world to see it. But no, it's really good. I don't know. We'll give it 4.5 out of 5. I think, which is pretty high.
Standards are high on that. And as we kind of wrap things up, it's been a couple of years now that you've come back to planet Earth. As odd as that sounds, but that's your reality.
It's true.
When you sit on your porch now with your wife, with your son, with your brother, with your family, what do you think when you look up at the sky and you see these things and you kind of remember back to what goes through your head now?
You come back from an experience like that eternally optimistic, with sort of a renewed or permanently refreshed sense of peace. I've been around the world 2,600 times, seen the whole thing, not through anybody else's filter. Not other people telling me what to worry about or what to think, but actually just a completely frank, honest, personal understanding of what the world is, and the age of it, and the constantly refreshed nature of it, and the things it withstood in the past. What we tend to really miss on the surface is the understanding of time. What does 4.5 billion years really mean? And the toughness of our planet. And we're not doing everything right, and we got to change some things, sure. And that's up to us. But there's a wonderful sense of grace that you get in seeing the world the way that I've had to see it. And that is permanently part of me, I think. And that is maybe one of the most lasting effects of the experience I've had.
Well, it's pretty powerful. You get to share with us in vehicles like this and on stage. Chris, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you. I hope you like the rest of the album.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's going to be great. October 9th. It is out. Space Sessions, Songs in a Tin Can. Rockstar Astronaut Commander Chris Hadfield.